Welcome to video 4 of chapter 9. And I'm going to begin with just a little review here. In video 3, I talked about theories of language development, and I finished with talking about cognitive processing theory and statistical learning, and specifically the concept of transitional probability. So just in case it was confusing, I just kind of wrote it out a little bit here on the left side. We'll get to the stuff on the right side later, but so this was the example I used in the last video of transitional probability. And remember, it's all about how an infant or toddler is analyzing the speech to determine what words are and what word units are, basically. So a baby hears a sentence like, I don't know, that elephant is really big, and they will also hear other sentences that include elephant, over time. Look at the elephant over there, and the elephant's wearing a hat or whatever. And in each of these examples I gave, the sound of Ellie, was followed by fant, elephant, elephant, elephant. And, obviously it could be, there's a couple of other words that Ellie could begin, Vader, elevator, element. Okay, but not too many syllables can follow the sound of Ellie. So when there's only a few possibilities, this signals a high transitional probability, and it tells the infant that Ellie is part of a word. It's the beginning of a word. And because there's only like a couple of possibilities that come after it, it must be part of a word. And so when they hear elephant, they connect the fant to the Ellie. Whereas after they hear the fant part of elephant, there's many, many possibilities. So sometimes they hear the elephant is wearing a hat, the elephant, I don't know, went to the store, the elephant looks really big. I mean, like, there's many, many possibilities that could follow the word elephant. And this is the way language works, is that, within a word, a syllable has, only so many possible followings, whereas in between words, there are many, many possible followings, because there's a lot of different words you could follow any particular word with. So this teaches them that elephant is a unit, because Ellie has a high transitional probability. There's only a couple of things that follow it. After hearing fant, there's many, many possibilities, which is a low transitional probability. And so it signifies to them that Ellie is the beginning of a word and fant is the ending of a word. And I know it's a little, it's a little bit complicated, but and it seems like it may at first thought seem like, well, how is an infant making sense of this? But I mean, like, obviously they're not doing it consciously. They're using their statistical learning devices, their brains, to analyze the speech stream. So I just wanted to touch on that again and have it kind of written out here a little bit before we start into stages of language development, which is what video 4 is all about. So let me go there now. And we'll begin with prenatal development of language and the fact that a fetus can hear many things in utero while they are within the womb. And when we say many things, I mean, they can hear their mother's speech. It's like, it certainly resonates internally, is what I want to say, I guess. When a mother is speaking, the developing fetus can hear it. Um, when we say many things, they're also hearing the heartbeat of the mother, the digestion of the mother, and I don't know, other possible sounds that are happening internally in the mother, as well as any loud sounds from the environment. But anyways, they did a study looking at if fetuses were, paying attention and learning from what they were hearing of the mother's voice. And they found in the study that infants prefer the sound of their mother reading a book when they hear her read it prenatally compared to the sound of her reading something new, something else. And then in the study, they had um, expectant mothers read the Cat in the Hat book twice a day prenatally. This is in the later months of pregnancy. The mothers would read the book twice a day. But this is with the fetus in the womb. And then after birth, the newborns preferred that story over others that they hadn't heard before. They could tell the difference between the story that they had been hearing while in the womb versus the mother reading news stories. And so this just showed that they were learning already that within the womb they can make out the mother's voice, and they are learning something about what she is saying, or in this case what she was reading, and they can tell the difference. Newborns also show preference for the language that their mother speaks, and this happens within the first few days of life. They show preference for the same language that the mother speaks. And so they do this test by having different speakers, speak the same language as the mother versus other languages. And they can recognize the difference. They can pick up on the language that's the same as their mother's language. So once again, this is just showing that, and this is within the first few days of life, showing that they can recognize the language the mother has been speaking while they've been in the womb. So it just shows that a lot of learning is already going on as far as language development before a baby is even born. Let's go through some of the sequence of stages after a baby is born, and we will be looking at crying and then cooing and then babbling on the upcoming slides. And once again, this is all happening in the first year of life, these stages. So crying is the first communication tool of an infant. It begins as a reflexive behavior. So initially a baby cries as a reflex, meaning that they can't control it. It eventually becomes intentional though. They can purposely cry, or eventually they will even learn how to stop crying once they start. Anyways, so we consider crying as the first communication attempts of an infant. Parents and caregivers can differentiate the severity and intensity of the cry, but not the specific reason for the cry. You may hear parents tell you differently, but in controlled studies, they show that there are not different cries for hunger versus discomfort versus loneliness, etc. That babies might cry louder or softer at times, but they do not. Research shows that they do not do specific cries that differentiate hunger, let's say from when they need changing and they're uncomfortable. A lot of mothers might tell you that, oh, I can tell when she's hungry, or I can tell when she needs changing based on her cry. But although parents may believe this, the cries are not different for those different um, for those different behaviors or those different reasons to cry. Okay, cooing. So cooing starts between 2 and 4 months of age following birth. It sounds like doves cooing, which is where it got its name. I don't know if you think you probably heard doves cooing before. Ooh, I can't do it, but okay. Anyways, it's basically vowel sounds. Okay, there's no clear syllables. There's soft vowel sounds like ah or oh or I mean ah. I don't know. So ah and ah and just kind of it's just kind of a repetition of the vowel sounds. Ah ah. Okay. Um, we consider this the be the beginnings of conversational rules because babies, in this 2 to 4 month period, will actually engage in turn taking with parents. So the baby might go ah, and then the mother says something. Oh, I don't know. Do you want your bottle? And the baby goes ah, and then the mother says something. But the it's considered that they're learning um, they're beginning to learn how to use language because they are not cooing while the mother speaks. I mean, the mother will speak, and when she finishes, they will start cooing. And then, when they finish cooing, the mother speaks. And so they're learning conversational rules already, in these first few months of life that you kind of take turns, which is interesting. Okay. So that's cooing, 2 to 4 months, soft vowel sounds. Then they enter the stage of babbling. This first begins around 4 to 6 months, so it follows the cooing stage. Initially, between 4 and 6 months, they will do individual consonant vowel sounds. So they might go ba, or da, or ma. So it's like, consonant and vowel, ba, da, ma, pa. And they will initially just do one individual sound at a time. So pa, da, da. Okay, and then they start repetition of the same sound beginning around 6 to 8 months. So initially from 4 to 6 months, they're doing one sound at a time. Now they start stringing them together. Ba 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 ba. Da 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 da. Ga 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 ga. Okay, and this is 4 to 6 months, or sorry, 6 to 8 months. This is 6 to 8 months. Then they engage in expressive babbling, which is mixing the babbles together. And this happens between about 8 to 12 months. It is a sign that this infant is getting ready to speak. The more expressive the babbling becomes, the more that they are, getting ready to engage in language. I want to show you a video of some expressive babbling with an older infant. Just find it here. Okay, so here we will see. Oh, hang on 1 second. Optimize for sound. Okay, here we will see an 11-month-old. So they're in that 8 to 12 month category, and you will see some very expressive babbling. Okay, so that is an example of expressive babbling. And you could tell that, what was the name? David, 11-month-old David there. I mean, like, it sounded like conversation. I mean, blah, 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 blah. I mean, like, it's like he's engaging in conversation. He's repeating a lot of the intonation patterns that he's heard, among his parents or older siblings. And it sounds like very conversational. David's probably getting ready to speak. Um, okay, and it would be about the right time. The first word normally comes around 13 months, so he was just a couple of months away from that. Okay, because of the babbles that infants engage in around the world, it doesn't matter which culture, they all go through the babbling stage of bas and ba-ba-bas and ga-ga-gas and ma-ma-mas. We tend to have words to represent mother and father and from these babble sounds. And so it makes it easy for the infant to learn those particular words or to at least sound like they're saying mama or papa or dada. So like we have words like mama and papa and dada and baba in some cultures and so the early words that we call parents are come right from these babbles. So it's something they can already produce. So when they learn mama or papa or dada or baba, I mean, these are sounds they already know how to make. So they can learn names for mother and father fairly early. And this is similar, once again, in many, many languages. These names for the for the mom and dad. Um, just one more note here. I mean, uh, deaf deaf babies who are learning sign language, right from birth, right after birth, they go through the same stages of language as hearing babies. So they go through a cooing stage, and then they go through a babbling stage. And the difference is that they babble with their hands and using hand gestures versus, producing sounds. So if a baby is exposed to sign language, once again, right from the time they're born, like they're being exposed to the sign language, they learn language at the same rate as a hearing infant. They go through the same stages of babbling, but they do it with their fingers and their hands. Okay. Um, Pre-verbal perception of language. Infants can distinguish sounds made in all languages around the world. Um, they've been called citizens of the world because of this. Um, I told you in an earlier video that when I was talking about phonemes, the smallest sound units of the language, that there are certain sounds in other languages that we cannot distinguish because we're English, if you're just an English speaker. So I told you about the two D sounds and the two T sounds in the Hindi language. Well, babies can distinguish those sounds. You can't as an adult because if you are an English, a native English speaker, but a baby in the first year of life can distinguish those sounds. And in fact, they can distinguish any sounds from any languages initially. This starts to disappear after about 7 months. The perception narrows to include the language that they're learning and being exposed to. So the brain starts to produce categories of sounds to match what they're hearing in the environment. And so if they're always hearing English spoken, then they will kind of mash together those two different D sounds because English only has one D sound, so they'll only produce one category. Just similarly, we only have one T sound versus the Hindi language that has two various T sounds. And so they'll once again, they'll kind of mash those sounds together into one category. So we get our brain starts to develop so that we can become very good at hearing and understanding our own language, that our native language that we're being exposed to. This is an example of brain plasticity once again. The brain is responding to the language that's being heard. If a baby, for instance, I know this is impossible. Let's say a baby was continuously exposed to many languages after birth, then their brains would not change this way. They would still hear all the different phonemes in the variety of languages that they're being exposed to. So this would be like, for instance, a natural bilingual is somebody that is exposed to two languages on a regular basis following birth. Well, their brains don't develop to favor one or the other language. They develop categories to represent the phonemes in both languages. So whatever the baby's exposed to, their brain makes connections in order to become good at hearing and understanding that particular language. How do adults help to foster language development? Well, we'll look at a couple of ways that they do this. First of all, when babies look or point at what they see, adults tend to label what it is for them. This is known as shared attention. So if your infant holds up something like a ball, you would say, "Oh, you have the ball." If they point to something, you will tend to label it. "Oh, that's the TV that you're pointing at. It's called a television." Whatever. So during this shared attention, the word that they hear enters the child's vocabulary, much sooner than if there was no shared attention. So like there may be times where you're talking about things in the environment, but if the baby's not, sharing your attention, they're not looking at the same thing as you, or you're not highlighting that, that you're pointing at something, or you're holding something, or they're holding something. This shared attention is very important for language learning. They really pick up quickly on the labels that they hear during these shared attention moments with the parent. Gesturing may enhance language learning in several ways. Excuse me. But adults differ in the amount of and type of gesturing that they do with infants. They found that the amount of gesturing that an infant experiences by 14 months is predictive of that child's vocabulary at 4.5 years of age. So a child that experiences more gesturing before 14 months, which is just over a year, they tend to have a better vocabulary at 4.5 years of age. So it just shows the importance of early gesturing. And by this, I mean like adults doing things like pointing to an object. Maybe you say, "Look, there's a deer," and you point to it. That's a gesture motion. It grabs the infant's attention. It creates a shared attention space. Or you hold something up. That's a form of gesture as well. You hold something in your hand as you talk about it. Okay, so if they experience more gesturing, they develop language quicker, is what this is telling us. It turns out that gesturing is done more in higher SES families versus lower SES families. I can't tell you necessarily why, but this is one result that they've found. And so the added gesturing in a higher SES family contributes to that child learning language quicker. Some families also obviously use sign language with their infants. I already kind of alluded to this. I'm not really going to talk about it anymore. You can read some more about it in the book. We also help language development by using child-directed speech. This is what is traditionally called baby talk. And I will admit that before I knew better, as a younger adult, I used to think that baby talk was the stupidest thing in the world. I mean, I always thought, why do parents do that? You know, kind of that slow down baby type speech where they say things like, "Oh, look at the ball. Do you want the ball? I'm going to bounce the ball. Bounce, bounce, bounce. I'm bouncing the ball." So, anyways, that's kind of maybe a bad example of baby talk, but it's basically you slow down your speech. You tend to do a higher pitched voice. Um, you exaggerate certain sounds and words. You repeat words often. It turns out that I was completely wrong when I thought it was stupid. Research clearly shows that child-directed speech or baby talk actually does foster language development. It increases the child's attention to speech, and so they, you know, it helps them to separate out individual words, helps them to pay attention to the specific sounds of their hearing, because you're slowing your words down, you're repeating words. It turns out to be very, very helpful for a child to engage in baby talk with them, even if it does sound stupid at times. This result has been shown in cultures across the world. Every culture has parents that engage in various forms of baby talk or child-directed speech that increases the child's language learning. Okay, well, I asked about this in the discussion board. So SES and language development, socioeconomic status, and how that affects language development. I already mentioned one result, that there's a difference in gesturing between lower versus higher SES families. There's also large differences in the amount and quality of the child-directed speech between different socioeconomic statuses. And these differences have consequences for the children's later development, including their readiness to enter school. As I pointed out in the discussion board, there was a study done by Hart and Risley. Let me go there now back to my whiteboard. Okay, come on, Mel's. And here we see, I just kind of put the highlights here. The 1995 study. They studied 42 families over a 2.5-year period. And recording what the toddlers, how much language the toddlers were being exposed to on average. I mean, obviously they weren't recording 24 hours a day. I think they took slices of like 1 hour per day, or maybe it was 1 hour per week over this 2.5-year period. But it was enough hours that they collected to be able to make generalizations. And anyways, what they found was that parents on welfare use an average of 600 words per hour with their toddlers. Working class parents used about 1,300 words per hour. That's over double. So over double the number of words that the working class infant or toddler was being exposed to. We get up to professional parents using 2,100 words per hour. So these are huge differences, 600 to 1,300 to 2,100. I mean, it's over 3 times the number of words in the professional parents case versus the parents on welfare. And so they concluded that by 3 years of age, children in professional families had been exposed to 8 million more words on average versus the children in welfare families. So by the time of 3 years of age, children in these professional families have been exposed to 8 million more words. So like hearing language is how our brains learn language. I've already talked about, statistical learning, and we analyze the speech that we hear in order to learn the language. If you hear 8 million more words by the time you're 3, then obviously you're going to be well ahead of the child that's hearing far less language. Okay. Let me go back to the PowerPoints and continue here. So differences in language development by families SES start early, as shown in the study. I mean, they were examining, toddlers, and it continues as children get older. So even though they were just examining infants, toddlers, and up to the age of 3, I believe. I mean, it doesn't mean that the amount of language is going to change all of a sudden. I mean, if professional parents are talking more to their young children, they're probably talking more to their preschool children and more to their elementary school children, probably more to their adolescents as well. So they hypothesize that this is just going to continue and throughout development. They showed in a study that even by 18 months, which is a year and a half of age, children from disadvantaged families already show less comprehension of simple words than do their more advantaged peers. So there's already a difference at a year and a half between children that come from more disadvantaged families versus more middle-class families or professional families. So, I mean, these differences, of course, are going to show up when these children start school, when they start kindergarten, grade 1. I mean, what studies are showing is that a lot of children from disadvantaged families are already behind by the time that they start school, and they're lagging in their language development, and so they start off school behind more advantaged children, and these differences persist throughout schooling. Okay, so moving on up to toddlers. First of all, 1 year of age, babies typically have only a few words in the vocabulary, but by 2 years of age, they generally have between 200 and 500 words. As I mentioned earlier, on average, first words appear around 13 months. There's a wide variety, though. A child can easily start talking at 8 or 9 months. Other children may not talk until 15 or 16 months, or so there is a wide variety. So children, around the 1 year mark, children may know a few words. Okay? But research shows that they can comprehend at 13 months of age. Toddlers can comprehend about 50 words, even though they've only started to produce speech. They can understand about 50 words. So they have a vocabulary, what's called a receptive vocabulary of about 50 words, but their production vocabulary, what they can produce, is maybe only 1 or 2 or 3 words at that time. If we go ahead to 18 months, that is the normal age that children can produce about 50 words at about 18 months. So because of this study, they hypothesized that perhaps it takes about 5 months for words that a toddler can understand. It takes about 5 months before they can produce those words. Because remember, they could understand 50 words at 13 months of age. And then around 18 months of age, five months later, they could produce 50 words. So this kind of led to the thinking that, well, maybe there's like a 5 month gestation period, like, they can understand words, but it takes them a number of months before they learn how to say those words. Um, Children go through an incredible vocabulary burst, typically in the second half of the second year of life, meaning between about 18 to 24 months, from a year and a half to 2 years is the typical time for this. And so new words are added to the vocabulary very rapidly. It doesn't show up for every child, but it is typical. Most children experience this vocabulary burst, which means like during like somewhere between a year and a half and 2 years, there'll be like a 2 or 3 month period where it just seems like they're adding words like every day to their vocabulary. All of a sudden, like it's just they just keep coming up with new words. Like it's an amazing time to be around a language learning child. Okay, let's go on. So how is it that they can learn to add words so quickly? Well, they use what's called constraints in order to form hypotheses about the names for things in the environment. These constraints are kind of like strategies, okay, for learning, strategies to help you learn new words. I'm going to go through a few of these that have been studied in research. The first one is the whole object bias. An infant or toddler assumes that when they hear a new word, that it's naming a whole object rather than just part of an object, or a piece of an object. I mean, because this is most likely actually true. So like if I'm at a zoo with my 1-year-old, let's say, I mean, and I might say like, look, there's a giraffe. And so the 1-year-old is going to assume that I'm talking about the whole animal. I'm not just pointing out its neck, and like, because how likely is it that I'm going to say, hey, look at the neck? Like I'd probably go first say, look, it's a giraffe. Or I'm not just talking about its head, or I'm not talking about its spots. I mean, it could be, excuse me. I'm all congested. Okay. I could be talking about various parts of the giraffe. I mean, I could be referring to its color, or its spots, or its neck, or its mouth, or its head, and this is, and the infant wouldn't know because they're just learning the word. So I could say, look at the giraffe, and really the word giraffe means neck. Like, anyways, but because it's actually more of a human trait that we will name whole objects, it's actually built into the infant's or toddler's brain to assume that it's a whole object being talked about. So when they hear look at the giraffe, they automatically think we were talking about the whole animal, the whole object. Okay. Or you say something like, here's your bottle. I mean, like, I could be talking about the nipple of the bottle, but but it's rare that people talk like that. You tend to name whole objects. And so okay, anyways, let's go on. That's the whole object bias. This helps them learn, they know what you're referencing. Even though they've never heard the word giraffe, they assume you're talking about the whole animal. Mutual exclusivity is another constraint. They assume that there's only one name for an object, so any other name must refer to a different object. So let's say, I don't know, I'm gesturing towards a table right beside my infant or my toddler, and it's got two objects on it. It's got their bottle, which they've heard named many times, and it's got a pen. And I say, "Oh, look, there's Daddy's pen." I mean, so the mutual exclusivity bias will they will automatically think I'm talking about the pen and not the bottle because they already have a name for the bottle. They've heard the name bottle before. Maybe they've never heard the word pen. So if there's two things, they assume that a new word applies to the one that they don't already know. No. Okay. Just like if I went to the zoo and let's say that there was giraffes and also elephants in the same enclosure, and they've already heard me talk about giraffes before, and I say, look, there's an elephant. They'll assume I'm talking about the one that they don't know. They already know giraffes, so they look at the big gray thing and say, think that must be an elephant. That's mutual exclusivity. There's also taxonomic constraints. I'm not really going to talk about this one. It's just that things can have more than one name. So something can be a horse, but also an animal. Something can be a cow and also an animal. And at some point, they start to learn this. Read more about it in the book. These are some more constraints. They use syntactic and semantic bootstrapping. So let me start with syntactic bootstrapping. This is when a child uses their knowledge of syntax or grammar in order to learn the meaning of new words. Okay, so remember that right from the time we're born, we have a brain that analyzes all the incoming speech that we hear. I talked about the nativism theory of language, that we're born with a language acquisition device, that helps us learn the syntax and grammar of a language. So right from the start, right from the time we're born, we are learning about syntax and grammar, things like what nouns versus verbs versus adjectives are, for instance, without knowing the names necessarily of those things. But so anyways, they've shown that in studies that children they'll use their knowledge that they have of syntax and grammar in order to kind of help to learn new words. So they've done studies using made up words. So look, if you look halfway down the right side here, I mean, so if you were to see the word or hear the word clumps, I mean, you should assume it's a noun. You're all experts speakers of language. So because it's just because it's a word with an S on the end, I mean, we add S to nouns to pluralize them. So, and they've shown that very young children being exposed to a new word like clumps, they know that it's a noun. So they're using their knowledge of what kinds of words you add S to, which is a part of our grammar and syntax, in order to learn that this brand new word clumps is a noun. And if they hear a word like pribite, they can tell it's a verb because you add ed to verbs. So this is just showing that you can learn new words like clumps or pribite. I mean, it's not telling you exactly what the word is, but it's telling you the part of speech of the word based on your knowledge of syntax. That's why it's called syntactic bootstrapping. You're using your knowledge of syntax to help figure out what kinds of words these are. And then it will help you learn the meanings of them. So if you hear a sentence like the thrallum progisted the car, I mean, right away that thrallum is some kind of thing, like maybe it's an animal or a machine or some kind of alien, who knows? But and then phlogiston is obviously a verb, so the thrum is doing something to the car. Whatever it's doing, like if it was biting the car, I would learn that phlogiston means biting. If and whatever the thing was that was doing something to the car, I would learn that that's a thrum. So if I'm looking at a picture and I hear the thrum just of the car, and there's a big machine that's with I don't know, let's say a metal melt that's biting the car, I've learned that, well, that big machine is a thrum, and progisting is like biting with its metal melt. So we can do this as adults, but also infants and toddlers are doing this. Here's another example. You have a very glickle smile. You should all know without me telling you that glickle is obviously an adjective. It's describing the smile. You can tell by how it appears in a sentence. It can't be a noun. We don't stick a noun right before the word smile, and or a verb. I mean, if you say you have a very something smile, I mean, that's going to be describing the smile. So glickle means something, and if I was looking at the smile, as I heard somebody say you have a very glickle smile, I would, learn something about what that word means. Oh, maybe this person has a really happy smile. Maybe glickle means happy. Right. We also engage in semantic bootstrapping. This is kind of the opposite. So with syntactic bootstrapping, we use syntax to learn new words. With the word semantic refers to meaning. We use our knowledge of word meanings in order to help us learn grammar and syntax. So, a young child is going to hear things like, rid ball. At some point, there's probably balls that the parents have for the child. At some point, there's a big ball they hear, and at some point there's a blue one, they hear blue ball. Well, with repetition of different types of balls and the way that you describe them, I mean, no one ever says, hey, look at the ball big. I mean, they say big ball and they say blue ball. And so the child uses their knowledge. So let's say they assume that they already know what a ball is. Assume that they've learned certain colors like red and blue, and they've learned things like big and small. Then they hear red ball, big ball, blue ball. They just learn that, whatever describes the ball, it always comes before it in a sentence. They've just learned some syntax or grammar. This is how young children are learning the syntax and grammar of a language when they're never ever taught. They're just hearing examples, and based on the fact that they already know what some simple words mean, then they see how they get paired together. No one ever says ball red or ball blue. They say blue ball, red ball, and they learn that adjectives come before nouns. And this is the way we all learn language. Okay. So those are examples of syntactic and semantic bootstrapping. So it's going back and forth. They use syntax to learn new words. They use their knowledge of words to learn syntax. Here we go. Here. Using all these various constraints, like the whole object bias and mutual exclusivity and syntactic and semantic bootstrapping, children will enter a period of fast mapping. This, in particular, you see this during the vocabulary spurt. It's a process by which children quickly learn new words, often after a single exposure. So what's so amazing about the vocabulary spurt and about fast mapping? I mean, just one time hearing a new word in the right condition, and they remember it and they know the meaning of it. Because these constraints are enough to often help them figure out what a word means. So the very first time I ever say to my toddler, here, have some watermelon, and I hold out, a slice of watermelon to them, Um, I mean, they assume it means, what I'm holding, and that means the whole thing, not just a seed or the color or anything like that. It applies to the whole object. Um, if something they see that it's something that they don't have a name for yet, they can use mutual exclusivity. And the way I use it in a sentence, I use syntactic bootstrapping, and so in one time they engage in fast mapping. They don't have to have me say the word watermelon 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 different occurrences one time. Research shows that one occurrence, and all of a sudden this child knows what a watermelon is. It's amazing, because if you've ever tried to learn a second language, you study it, you repeat words, use flashcards. It's hard to remember, a brand new word that you've never heard before. I mean, like, it's much harder for us as adults. This is why we have to study and do flashcards and things like that and test ourselves. And yet, here it is, a toddler is just hears it one time and they've got the word. So that's what fast mapping is. That's why they can start adding words like, you know, a word per day, or even more than one word per day, and just like constantly adding new words to the vocabulary. Okay, let's go on. Okay, so moving on up to telegraphic speech. This begins at about a year and a half of age, approximately, so 18 months. This is when they start combining words, around a year and a half. So they go through a one-word phase. I didn't really have this on a slide, but remember I said a typical child produces the first word at 13 months. Between about 13 months and 18 months, they use one word at a time. So they might say bottle or blankie or sleep or whatever words that they might have learned, daddy, or dada or mama. Okay, anyways, then all of a sudden, they get to, once again, around a year and a half, it varies. All of a sudden, you'll hear them string two words together. So they want to say, I want the bear, and they say want bear. And they don't say bear want. They don't get the order wrong. They are already, when they start combining two words, they put them in the right order. This shows that they already learned a lot of syntax and grammar. They know that want comes before bear, and they wouldn't say bear want. Okay, so um, um, it will start with two words at a time. After a little while, they might string together three words at a time. It's known as telegraphic speech because it's named after, early telegrams that we used to use to communicate across distances. They would like do the dots and dashes and send a telegram. Anyway, they used to charge people per word. So you would say, you wouldn't send words like I or the. If you wanted to meet somebody at a train station at 5, you would say like, meet train station 5 or something like that. You would say, let's meet at the train station at 5 o'clock. I mean, because you don't want to pay the extra money. So this is why this received the name telegraphic speech. They leave out all the small words, all the less important small words. So they say things like want bottle, or they might, when they get to three words, they might say something like mama go car. So they want to, maybe they're saying that the mummies went up to her car, or maybe they want to go for a drive with their mother. I mean, I don't know why they might say mama go car, but it's an example of something they might say. Anyways, telegraphic speech. Okay, let's go on. Early childhood. So now we're getting to preschoolers. I've mentioned this in another video, but both Piaget and Vygotsky noticed that preschoolers often talk to themselves. Piaget called it egocentric speech. And he believed it was a weakness, it was a deficit. That he said, well, they're just demonstrating their egocentrism. They believe that everyone can hear them as they talk to themselves. So they have an inability to take the role of other people in conversations. So Piaget saw it as a weakness. Vygotsky saw it as a very important. It turns out Vygotsky was right on this one. He called it private speech. And then he said that they use this in order to guide their own behavior. It wasn't just purposeless. It wasn't because they thought that everyone could hear them. I mean, that they were actually, it had a lot of purpose. They were guiding their own actions. And this is why they talked to themselves. They were kind of repeating instructions perhaps that they'd heard their parents tell them before. Now they're telling themselves, don't cross that line. You're not allowed to go further than that. Don't go past that the sandbox, or and maybe the parents had always told them not to go past the sandbox. So now they repeat it to themselves to reaffirm, and to guide their own behavior. Vygotsky pointed out that this speech to themselves that's initially out loud, it increasingly becomes silent as they age, and that it eventually becomes their thoughts. So he said there's a natural transformation from speaking out loud to yourself and then speaking internally to yourself, and then just not really even speaking anymore, but just thinking, the same kinds of things. And if you think about it, you probably often guide yourself with thoughts. You don't necessarily say it out loud, but you're saying, okay, I need to do this now. Like in your head, okay, I got to remember to do this step and then this step. That's one. Moving on up to middle childhood. So this is like elementary school children. They start to, or not start to, but they continue to learn discourse skills, such as the ability to understand whether a story or information they are hearing makes logical sense. So it's not just about, understanding language anymore and understanding what words mean, but actually thinking about, what whole sentences and phrases or paragraphs in, that how what they mean in conversation. So for instance, just to give you an example, elementary school children can identify the problem in the following short paragraph. So let's say you hear, on her way, she lost her purse. When she got to the store, she took out her purse and bought her favorite candy. So if you tell this to an elementary school child, they'll be like, what? I mean, she lost her purse and then she took out her purse. That doesn't make sense. And it just shows that, they progress beyond just identifying individual words or individual sentences, but they're actually looking at the progression of sentences, which is discourse, like the logical argument that's being made as somebody talks to you or tells you a story. Elementary school children also develop meta-linguistic abilities, which just means that you start to think about language and how to use it. So you start to think about aspects of language and parts of language. And so just as an example, an elementary school child might find it funny to hear the following knock-knock joke. Knock, knock. Who's there? Lettuce. Lettuce who? Let us in. We're hungry. Okay. And okay, hopefully you got that. Now the reason they obviously find it funny is that they recognize that lettuce, like the leafy vegetable, it sounds the same as let us, and so they start understanding that words can sound alike but indicate very different things. and have different meanings. So obviously, if you're referring to lettuce, the vegetable, I mean, like, it has a very different meaning than the phrase "let us." Anyway, so this is metalinguistic abilities or awareness that it's kind of like starting to play with language, like starting to understand different properties of language, that things can sound alike but mean something different. Also, things like rhyming is a metalinguistic ability, understanding, like being able to produce rhymes for a word and understanding why words rhyme, that's like you're gaining understanding about language and properties of language. So a lot of metalinguistic abilities start to show up during elementary school years. And by the way, you do that knock knock joke with a preschooler, they're not really going to get it because they don't have enough knowledge about language to recognize what the joke is. I'm going to skip language to teenagers. You're still responsible for it. I'm just going to let you guys read it on your own. I mean, there's not much to it. It's a little paragraph in the book. So make sure you do read that section. And I'm going to conclude this fourth video on stages of language development.